Weekly jobless claims continue their recent trend lower. The economy continues to reopen. What does that mean for those still looking for work? Our panel joins us to discuss the U.S. economy and its reopening. Norm Champ, former Director, Division of Investment Management, SEC. Francis Newton Stacy, Director, Portfolio Strategy at Optimal Capital. Francis, I'll start with you. Are you feeling optimistic about what we've been seeing? At least jobless claims are going in the right direction, right?
I'm definitely feeling optimistic. Of course, this is 51 weeks above the previous record at 695,000, but we are definitely headed in the right direction. People are getting vaccinated, and I think it's now sort of becoming palpable and real that we are going to have an actual reopening and that the virus is not going to be the primary concern, going forward. There's some sense of normalcy that's coming back in.
Yeah. And tell me your thoughts, Norm, as we look at what's going on here. We got our recent jobs report and, we rubbed our eyes and really saw so many jobs being added in leisure and hospitality. And this has to do with reopening, right?
Absolutely. Even a state like New York that's had very restrictive lockdowns is going to open up restaurants 50% next week. So we're really starting to see a reopening, and I think I totally agree. I think these jobless claims are going to keep declining, and it'll be a great day when we get below the record from after the '08 crisis. And then if we can just keep pushing them down over the coming months, and it's going to be led by retail, hospitality, restaurants, that kind of thing.
Norm, what do you think about the stimulus package? Is it important to our recovery?
Well, look, you are injecting money into the economy, so that always helps economic activity. We are also taking on levels of debt that, of course, have never been seen in U.S. history before, with this kind of, this percentage of GDP in debt. And that's a concern, I'm afraid, about what that might pose for the future. It also includes the supplemental payment to people who are unemployed, which I understand the good intention of that. But of course, that's a subsidy not for work, which is not necessarily that helpful. We have over 6 million job openings. So it would be, I'm hopeful that people want to get back in the workforce and take some of those jobs.
Yeah, you make a great point with the JOLTS numbers and seeing that there are jobs to be had. Francis, what are you watching when it comes to the market? I know that you've been keeping a keen eye on the NASDAQ, right? As we get in these pieces of news on jobless claims and JOLTS, we're taking a look at what was released today. That was breaking news today. Your thoughts, Francis?
So the NASDAQ is, as we know, largely dependent upon yields, and the yields are kind of moving back up again. It's going to be interesting to see if the yields, the 10-year having a higher low, is going to go back up and test its high, around the 1.63 level, and what the NASDAQ does there. The NASDAQ valuations, as we know, were super frothy. Tech was definitely the COVID winner. And, the question was, do valuations matter? And when yields came and went, they do matter. Also, I think that the yield trade, or the bond trade, rather, pushing the yields up, was exacerbated by the fact that originally in Powell's testimony, he didn't really address the yields coming higher. Of course, since then, we've had a lot of talk about potential Operation Twist, no real talk of yield curve control. And these terms, mean relatively the same thing. However, bringing 1.9 trillion in stimulus into the economy is definitely going to put, bring a lot of new bonds in, a lot of new supply, which is going to put pressure on yields. And that's going to bode well for the NASDAQ. It had a nice correction, tested 12,500. Right now, it needs to get above its March 2nd high to continue on its upward move.
So what areas do you think, Francis, are some good investments or opportunities for investing?
Well, I think the general acceleration in inflation and acceleration in growth is still in play. I would buy commodities on a dip. I'm looking very much at the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar has actually risen, which the whole stimulus narrative, et cetera, supports a lowering of the U.S. dollar. So I think that could be an early sort of signal that something is changing. The U.S. dollar arguably rightly or wrongly, is still sort of a flight to safety. So there are still a number of risks in the marketplace with the economy not yet having the full reopening, potentially credit markets when things come out of forbearance. So I'm watching that U.S. dollar. But if the U.S. dollar continues to trend lower, we continue to get massive stimulus, then of course that's going to support growth and inflation, which is going to support, the reopening, stocks that have done so well, commodities that have done so well, and those things I think will continue to move higher.
Yeah, Norm, your thoughts for investment. You mentioned how New York is reopening and adding some of the restaurants. We just got our movie theaters reopened this past week. It's nice to see the lights on and the popcorn coming down as I walk by, on the avenues. So it's exciting to see this, but do you have certain areas that you think may be better investments over the next 12 months than others?
Well, I think the hospitality and leisure and all those stocks obviously got beaten way down. And so I'm sure there's some good investments still in those areas. I think it's just going to be a question of how fast people do get back out and do things. And are they going to go to that movie theater? Are they going to go to the restaurants? It's going to depend on vaccinations. I think how safe people feel based on the vaccines. But I would have thought there's some really good opportunities in those sectors. I'm also concerned as well about inflation. We've been talking about, we've had zero interest rates since the fall of 2008, right? And we've been talking about how that would cause inflation someday. Well, here we are, and still hasn't. But we can't print this much money and spend this much money without it eventually happening. So that would indicate, I think, commodities, real estate also holds pretty well in inflationary times. So I do finally think it's time for people to think about what it might look like with inflation.
Norm, let me ask you this, because as you mentioned inflation, and some folks are saying, Norm, that it's stoking what we're seeing with Bitcoin, which is above 56,000. And frankly, I've been watching gold, our good old commodity of gold, and gold has had an incredible week too, Norm. What do you think is happening? Are you a fan of either gold or Bitcoin?
I'm a huge fan of gold. I'm actually not ordinarily. Gold is always challenged, right? Because doesn't pay any dividends, right? It doesn't actually do anything. It's demand only, which is the story with all commodities. But I would have thought here metals are interesting in this environment. On Bitcoin, let's pass that on to someone who understands what's going on with Bitcoin. I mean, the volatility and the moves in Bitcoin so extreme that I'm not sure what to make of it. I do, it does appear that more places are taking it for payment, right? Almost every week, there's some announcement of some business that's going to accept it. Those are new. That's different. So maybe it is.
Yeah, it is. Well, let me stop you there. Francis, I'll give you the final quick thought.
On Bitcoin? On
anything you like.
Anything I like. Well, Bitcoin's interesting because some people want it to be sort of a currency. But as Norm pointed out, it cannot be this volatile and actually represent a currency. I think, central banks are going to come up with their own digital currencies. Bitcoin will be relegated to, some kind of digital gold or commodity, or, it will remain a security and not really a currency because of the volatility, because of the liquidity, et cetera, et cetera. But final thoughts, watching rates go up. I mean, real estate could have some pressure if rates continue to rise. So we'll just have to see how much the stimulus pushes rates down versus how much the inflationary narrative pushes rates up.
Norm Champ, Francis Newton, Stacy, thank you both. Great conversation. And I saw Bitcoin was above 57,000, almost 58,000 as we were speaking. So I'll correct myself there. Great conversation. Thank you both.